Of course, I am in the 80s. I have my own career. Yeah, so it was very hard to work with the wedges and stuff, but we know.
I'd like to introduce some friends of mine to you. Would you welcome Mr. Robert Plant, Mr. Jimmy Page, Mr. John
This is Robert Townsend. I'm backstage, and like I said, we're going to talk to Robert Plant in a minute, but everybody's here. Bob Geldof is standing right here.
Okay, 10, 8, 7, 6, 5, 3, 2, here it comes, guys! Good old
January 1986. Secret rehearsals for the Led Zeppelin reunion take place. The following was extracted from a Robert Plant interview, Rolling Stone number 522, March 24th, 1988. We had a week together with Tony Thompson. This was January 1986. The guy who's now my tour manager was brought in to look after the drums. We took a village hall, filled it with parachutes to take all the angles and corners of the room, and set up the equipment. Page suddenly arrived and we plugged in, but as much as he wanted to do it, it wasn't time for Page to do that. He had just finished the second Firm album, and I think he was a bit confused about what he was doing. And the interesting thing is that after 7 years of being without him and fending for myself, I'm a lot more forthright. When I reach a conclusion, I immediately react to it. Way back in the old days, this might have taken a week of mutual discussion. One person couldn't make the decision of 4 people. We played for about 2 days. No new material. It was the most bristling, embarrassing moment. To have all that will and not knowing what to play. Jonesy played keyboards. I played some bass. It sounded like David Byrne meets Husker Du. I guess sounding good and quite odd, because of Jonesy's tendency to play these jolly rollicking keyboards. Jimmy cutting across the whole thing with these soaring chord mechanisms, and me plotting the routes on the bass. It was pretty good, and there were 2 or 3 things that were very promising. There was this little club we used to go in this little town. Tony Thompson was a celebrity, so he was invited to parties and stuff. We were too, because we'd been famous once. Tony ended up in one of these small minicars with 5 other people. They took a corner too fast and crashed in somebody's basement, and that was it. Jonesy and I often chose to walk back to the place we were staying at 2 in the morning. Page wouldn't come out, which is hardly the way to get everything back together again. Then Tony left the road with his band. One of the roadies, who is now my tour manager, played drums. He was quite good too, but the whole thing dematerialized. Jimmy had to change the battery on his wah-wah pedal every 1.5 songs. And I said, I'm going home. Jonesy said, why? Because I can't put up with this. But you lived with it before. I said, look man, I don't need the money. I'm off. For it to succeed in Bath, I would have had to be far more patient than I had been for years. Like a carbon copy play from 1985, the Firm released a new record in February and went on tour. Mean Business was their second and final album. First off, I have to say, despite its low sales and what critics say, this is my favorite record by the Firm. It has entered a sort of into the outdoor appreciation category for me. Never mind the album cover by Aubrey Powell from Hypnosis that reminds me of Led Zeppelin's album from 1979. Production-wise, Mean Business sounds better than the Firm's debut. The mix is not asleep, the drums are up front, the bass is well balanced. Paul Rodgers is passionate and seems to believe in what he's singing. The album was recorded in the fall of '85 and had the benefit of a third set of ears in Julian Mendelssohn on his first gig as co-producer along Paul and Jimmy. Julian's career would lead him to work with the likes of Pet Shop Boys, Tasmin Archer, and Paul McCartney. Yes, he was responsible for the Pet Shop Boys hit singles Always on My Mind and It's a Sin.
Now, you co-produced it with Julian Mendelssohn.
Yeah.
How did you meet up with him?
Well, when we did a 12-inch mix of Radioactive, which I don't know whether that was played very much in the States or not, but it was an elongated version of the single, and he was good to work with, and I thought it would be nice to do this with him.
Do you think Chris and Tony's role changed while you were on tour, and then by the time you went into the studio again?
Well, they I don't know what the word is really. As far as the LP goes, there's a great variety. There's a much the maturity of the group over what is basically a year, I think would show. I hope it will show anyway. And I think that the depth employed with each track, which it wasn't like a lack of depth of commitment on any of the tracks on the first album. It's just getting to know each other more and playing together better.
Now, it's called Mean Business, right?
Yeah.
Why?
Why not? I mean, it's a pun, you know. It's a pun. I mean, I'll leave it to all the press to say they mean business, you know. This is business.
Do you think any Zeppelin stuff will ever creep back into the repertoire?
I don't think so.
If the firm's debut album was the one to get Jimmy back in the game, Mean Business has Page in full throttle. His riffs and solos are much more present in the mix, and ready for good business. Now down to the composition side of things. We've got 8 songs in total, 4 tracks written by both Paul Rodgers and Jimmy Page, 3 songs by Paul Rodgers, and 1 track, Dreaming, by Tony Franklin, who plays bass, guitar and keyboards on the album. John Paul Jones would be proud. Fortune Hunter starts off the record with a blast. This 1981 idea from the XYZ demos gets a nice treatment led by Chris Slade's aggressive drumming and Paul Rodgers' powerful pipes. The song's middle section shows Jimmy back at his light and shade weapons. Track 2, Cadillac, although a bit repetitive for some, it follows the mid-tempo drone motif used by Robert Plant on Shaken and Stirred to a much greater effect. It carries Jimmy's latter-day Zeppelin guitar textures into a tasteful display of chord voicings from a place of second chances. Track 3, All the King's Horses, was written by Paul Rodgers in full 80s style, plus background synthesizer work by Tony Franklin. The song is very effective in building momentum, and the catchy hook seems to act like an overture segment for the next number. In my opinion, the firm's greatest song and contribution to the 80s, Live in Peace. A reflection of injustice and humanity losing itself to violence, greed and solitude, a ballad and soundtrack to Cold War fears of nuclear winter, a song so relevant in modern day lunacy, it's eerie, frightening and prophetic. For all my complaints on what seems to be Paul Rodgers' emotional detachment on the firm's debut, this song makes up for it, and more. I discovered the track back in high school, not knowing this was the same guy who sang All Right Now, but the guitar work sounded familiar. Live in Peace was first released on Paul Rodgers' 1983's Cut Loose album. He played all the instruments, and well, as a drummer, he is a great singer. The song had potential but needed a real band to come to life, as it sounded too linear and safe. The firm gave this track a menacing vibe and profound melancholy. Jimmy Page's guitar solo was his Phoenix Rising moment of the 80s, up there with his best Led Zeppelin work. We hear him battling his demons, overcoming darkness, and the Russian roulette of rock and roll. The song's finale evokes some of that Achilles' last stand surrender in the chord of E minor.
done a new LP, and there's 3 numbers off it that we wanted to feature on video, or at least it was suggested that we did. You know, I always get nervous about doing videos because I'm hardly like instant actor like most of these kids in the new groups are. But yeah, no, it's fun. It's been good actually.
Okay. Now the one we've been watching today is what's the title of the track?
Well, that's "Live in Peace," and really that was probably the backbone of the fact of doing another album with the firm after the first. I'd say that was a number that was featured when we first went to America on our first tour, even in Europe on our first tour. There was a number from Paul's solo LP. There is a version of it from Hammersmith that was live. You see, we did the first album in not such a long time. Well, mind you, I suppose this didn't take any longer, really, this LP. But the fact was that album was almost in reverse to the way that most groups go out. Our album almost promoted a tour because Paul and I wanted to go out live, whereas it's usually the other way around. The tour promotes, you know, the album. And in fact, there's a lot of flaws in it. I mean, the material wasn't very strong. I mean, there was some good, you know, 2 or 3 good things on it, but as an overall album, I guess it had its weak points. And after having, you know, gone on the road, especially playing in the States where you can do, a consistent tour and play to people and, you know, just sort of generally get electric between audience and band, really the band owed it to themselves, or to the people as well, really, you know, to tear down the walls.
And that one?
That's more a guitar-orientated number. It's more rough and ready, I guess, than All the King's Horses.
Side 2 begins with one of Jimmy's best riffs for the firm's live show setting. So simple, yet so Jimmy. It breathes some of the style from that famous 1972 outtake, Houses of the Holy. I can see this song coming to life had Bonzo not passed away in a Led Zeppelin album from the 80s. Chris Slade's heavy attack and Tony Franklin's groove make this pop song in disguise a perfect celebration for audiences from when the middle class ruled the world and houses were affordable. The background chorus at the end makes the Dogs of Doom proud. Track 6 is a Tony Franklin showcase on rhythm guitar and bass. Dreaming is a progressive pop gem, an elegant piece that features a deceptive opening riff and groove in 5/4. It makes a seamless transition to the 4x4 chorus, back and forth. Jimmy Page plays lead guitar in full economy of movement, adding what's right for the song, a la Jimmy 1978. Track 7, Free to Live, has a great intro reminiscent of the Eagles for some reason, but I'm sure it sounds like another classic rock artist I cannot put my finger on. If you guys know who it is, please let me know in your comments. Not the strongest moment from the record, but a catchy riff indeed. Jimmy's lead in the middle is memorable. Paul Rodgers does not sound motivated on what seems to be a chorus without much afterthought, reminding us of those blurry moments from their firm's debut. Closing track, Spirit of Love, comes out of nowhere really, meaning it doesn't sound like a song that these guys would sit down and write as a band. Paul Rodgers' third composition was almost designed for a live show. Jimmy's guitar solo was a great finale for their 1986 concerts. It got me hooked from day one, and then I knew why. It follows the same 3-chord descending sequence from Led Zeppelin's Thank You guitar solo section, but it takes it to a faster tempo, adding glorious backup vocals. You can tell the band had fun recording this.
the time I did bits and pieces on it, and I don't really know now what I actually ended up doing. Apparently it's out, and I'd really like to hear it, because I haven't.
What was it called?
I don't know. It wasn't called I Don't Know, but I just don't know.
This one's from 1999. It's called Mellow Saxophone.
Heartbeat 86 was a benefit concert staged at the National Exhibition Centre near Birmingham, England. It was organised by drummer Bev Bevan to raise money for the local children's hospital. The show started at 3 p.m, with musicians and bands mostly from Birmingham performing until late into the evening. Roy Wood performed his festive hit, I Wish It Could Be Christmas Every Day. Robert Plant performed with the group Big Town Playboys. The finale featured all the artists on stage, including George Harrison, for a special rendition of Johnny B. Good. Robert Plant performed 3 songs, She Walks Right In, Come On, and Mellow Saxophone. His band featured Andy Sylvester on guitar, Mike Sanchez on piano, Ian Jennings on bass, John Spinetto on drums, Ricky Cool and John Wilmot on tenor saxophone, Lawrence Perry on trumpet, and John Wallace on baritone saxophone. British rock band Virginia Woolf released their debut album featuring Jason Bonham on very well played drums. Their musical style was very much hard rock 80s, the sort of music many bands had to do if they wanted to make it, according to record executives. It was all down to chasing the next final countdown or rock the night without losing the grip on the almighty Hairspray. The record was produced by Queen's own Roger Taylor, who can be seen in the band's video for their hit single Waiting for Your Love. They played as opening act for The Firm on their 1986 tour.
What sort of venues are you going to play this time, do you know?
No.
I mean, what would you like to play?
Don't ask me technical questions.
Okay. So would you like to play big ones or a bit medium size?
Oh, medium size. I think that's what we're doing anyway, you know. We've got palm trees again, haven't we?
Yeah.
Certainly the most severe accident that has ever taken place in the short history of civilian nuclear power.
Good evening, I'm Ted Koppel, and this is Nightline. It seems virtually certain that what the Soviets have experienced is a nuclear meltdown. There is word that radiation from the Soviet accident could, within a week or so, make its way over the North Polar region to the western United States.
In the Soviet Union, there is rarely bad news. Airplane crashes are not ordinarily reported. So it was extraordinary that Soviet TV news did report a big accident today. It came deep in the newscast, almost buried, after production reports, after lists of worker awards, and this is what it said. An accident has occurred at the Chernobyl atomic power plant as one of the atomic reactors was damaged. Measures are being undertaken to eliminate the consequences of the accident. Aid is being given to those affected. A government commission has been set up. 4 ambiguous sentences that contain nothing about injuries or deaths.
The worst that can happen involves a loss of cooling water around the fuel rods.
I was told this morning that iodine had been detected, and that's one of the most serious elements to worry about. Iodine can be absorbed directly by breathing, and it can accumulate in your thyroid and cause thyroid cancer in sufficient doses.
In the Soviet Union, they don't have independent media, they don't have nightline shows, they don't have the Union of Concerned Scientists. They have very little choice but to move in the direction of nuclear energy. They have no other options, so the fundamental Soviet economic policy is not going to change.
I think we need to make more of an assessment of the accident before we can, really say what the impact's going to be.
When do you think you're going to have your picture together?
Knowing what happened to the firm soon after, the release of Mean Business is a big what if and a weird ending, just when they were starting to find themselves as a band. Why do I think Mean Business is a good record? Because it got Jimmy back to a Led Zeppelin 1 kind of energy. He elevated Paul Rodgers' powerhouse tracks with vibrant pageisms that once at full speed made Chris Slade and Tony Franklin so much more confident. The pieces came together and their chemistry clicked in all the right places. It stopped being a let's play with Jimmy kind of thing to let's play as The Firm. Mean Business makes a statement for the 80s, a narrative of urban stories and shady characters, juxtaposed to the promising light of present-day open roads and wisdom. What happened next was a shame indeed. Their 1986 tour saw low attendance numbers for many reasons, including a busy market at the time. What seems to be most obvious is that their setlist was pretty much identical to 1985, with them even playing Catalog and Live in Peace as back as 1984.
As you asked about Live in Peace, that was one of the numbers that we had. That and a number called Cadillac. Those were the only two that we did from the past that anyone may have heard if they'd been to see any of the shows. And all the rest of the stuff was new material that we had to write. Right. So consequently, that new material really was the suck it and see aspect.
One wonders why didn't they record these tracks for their first album? Live in Peace would have been in the right place at the right time. In pre-Live Aid, We Are the World 1985. By 1986, it was old news, unfortunately. Their setlist remained a Best of Death Wish 2, Paul Rodgers solo tracks, covers, and their firm's own repertoire. The same product. A ballsy move, or maybe just lazy, in quite a busy era. Let's take a look at some of the albums released up until May, when the firm's run ended. Van Halen's 5150 tour was a monster success. Hit singles Why Can't This Be Love and Dreams sold like hotcakes. 5150 saw the band in a sort of The Firm-like situation. They mainly stuck to songs from their new album, Sammy Hagar's solo work, and all material kept to a minimum. Even Van Halen featured Led Zeppelin's Rock and Roll as a closing number on all shows. The novelty of Jimmy Page and Paul Rodgers coming back to the stage had worn off. At this point, they needed to play Bad Company and Led Zeppelin songs to keep it interesting for fans. I'm not dissing their live show per se. It was exciting. It rocked hard. But from a marketing standpoint, they shot themselves in the foot by returning so quickly to the concert stadium circuit. Smaller venues would have been a good idea, but that didn't sit well with Jimmy, who would learn Broadway the hard way in just a couple of years. The Firm should have done what Robert Plant did in '83 and tour until their second album was released. Judging by live footage from their last ever performance in Seattle 1986, the group had potential and knew a thing or two about rock and roll. Their chemistry was cooking Iron Chef mode, but it was cut too short. One of the big questions from the 80s. Their best work was yet to come. Chris Slade went on to drum for AC/DC in Asia. Tony Franklin teamed up with guitarist John Sykes in his post-Whitesnake band, Blue Murder. According to single Paul Rodgers though, the Firm was built to last for 2 albums. By the end, I felt that Jimmy was up and running and in great shape. He was in fantastic form, and I sort of thought, well, job done really. We left it on a high note. Jimmy decided to take the solo artist route, and how I wish he remained in a band. It's hard for band-oriented guitar players to make it on their own. Time and time again we've seen it. Some manage to escape this like Steve Vai post David Lee Roth and Whitesnake. Others get typecasted like Slash or Mark Hamill. Bonzo's passing seemed to have left Jimmy a surviving prisoner of Zeppelin, Robert Plant a freeform gypsy, and John Paul Jones a musical orphan. Page would pursue a band for the rest of his career, only to find himself back in the same game, or Chris Robinson's ego getting in the way. Hit Parader published a piece on John Paul Jones and his career at the time, including Scream for Help. What's fascinating about the interview is Jones discussing his interest in working with computers, more specifically, writing and performing music through artificial intelligence, in a similar way to Frank Zappa and his St. Claver projects, like his 1986 release Jazz from Hell, which got the Grammy Award for Best Rock Instrumental Performance in 1988. With a solo album, you have to commit yourself to something. I'm interested in so many different styles of music. It would be very difficult to put out a solo album. My interests are far too varied. With a soundtrack, it's very easy to do, because it's supposed to be that way. The soundtrack isn't all I've done in the past 6 years. My main interest is composing contemporary classical music. I guess you call it computer music. Essentially, I'm writing new music for classical musicians. There are a lot of very fine American musicians in the classical world who are quite enlightened. They really enjoy having someone from my background do a piece for them. It doesn't have the academic starting point, and to them, it's more vital. I don't see a vinyl release, not really. That aspect doesn't interest me. At this point, I'd like to see a couple of hundred people sitting there enjoying it. My pieces are instrumentalist repertoire, and I'd rather have them tour around the world than put on vinyl. In this field, I'm not a musician anyway. I'm a composer. You've got to conduct the orchestra with the help of the computer and listen to various cues. The orchestra has to know what you're doing, and they got to be comfortable with what they're playing. I'm trying to expand that now. I'm working on some new programs that will get one computer to generate the song and another to compose off what their first computer is doing. Essentially, you get one computer to listen to a person or another computer and react to it the way a musician or an orchestra would. What I'm doing actually is getting into a level of artificial intelligence through music. November 9th, 1986, Hammersmith Odeon, London. Jimmy Page joined the fictional band Bad News for a comedy show. The comic strip presents. Page and Brian May were brought for a guitar duel with Bad News frontman. November 15th, Beastie Boys released their debut album, Licensed to Ill, the first rap album to top the Billboard chart. Their use of classic rock samples caught the industry by surprise. Their track Rhymin' and Stealing featured John Bonham's explosive beat from When the Levee Breaks. Later on the album came The Ocean and Custard Pie. Led Zeppelin's music helped launch hip-hop's first blockbuster LP. Axl Rose bumped into one of the Beastie Boys at a Los Angeles house party in 1988 and told him to stop ripping off Zeppelin. The surviving members of Led Zeppelin were notified about the Beastie Boys' use of their music. They didn't sue the group. Jimmy Page later said, "I guess I felt it was a compliment." Beastie Boys would reuse Bonham's Levee Breaks drums on their 1989 album, Paul's Boutique.
Fabulous albums, and to present the award, one of the greatest singers of all time from Led Zeppelin originally, ladies and gentlemen, Robert Plant.